Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had the opportunity to enjoy lunch and the opportunity also to network with your colleagues. It is my honor to have the opportunity to introduce to you the chair of the PCAOB, Erica Williams, who has presented at this conference since she took the office. So with that, Erica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Paquita. It's always wonderful to talk to you. And I also want to thank former PCAOB Chief Auditor Douglas Carmichael for his work to make this year's conference a success once again. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I am thrilled that you're going to be hearing from our newest PCAOB board member, George Baruch, along with the head of enforcement for the PCAOB, Bob Rice, and our chief auditor, Barb Vantage. Before we begin, I must issue the standard disclaimer that the views I express here are my own and not necessarily those of the PCAOB board or the talented and dedicated PCAOB staff. Since we last spoke in May, the PCAOB has been busy. As you know, we are laser focused on our mission of protecting investors, and we are advancing 3 key goals to meet that mission: modernizing our standards, enhancing inspections, and strengthening our enforcement. I'm proud to update you on our progress today. When we spoke in May, the PCAOB had recently issued proposed changes to modernize a suite of standards that address core auditing principles and responsibilities, including reasonable assurance, professional judgment, due professional care, and professional skepticism, known as AS1000. The proposed changes will center investors by making clear that auditors have a fundamental obligation to protect them. That was on the heels of action we took late last year to finalize a new standard that strengthens requirements that apply to audits involving multiple audit firms and issue proposals on quality control and the confirmations process for public comment. The confirmation process touches nearly every audit, and quality control systems lay the very foundation for how firms approach everything they do, including performing audits. Since then, Barb and her team have been hard at work. This summer, we also proposed amendments to give auditors additional direction addressing specific aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis of information in electronic form. And we proposed a new standard on noncompliance with laws and regulations, or NOCLAR. When sanctions, fines, and civil settlements directly affect a company's bottom line, or reputational damage causes a company's stock value to decline, investors pay a price. The proposed NOCLAR standard aims to better protect investors by strengthening the requirements for auditors to identify, evaluate, and communicate information that may indicate a company's noncompliance with laws and regulations. In the fall, we issued a proposal on a rulemaking project that would hold associated persons accountable when they negligently, directly, and substantially contribute to firms' violations. The proposal is designed to make sure our rules match what investors already expect, that when an associated person's negligence directly and substantially contributes to firm violations, that can put investors at risk. The PCAOB has tools to hold them accountable. Finally, the board unanimously voted to adopt the new standard and related amendments on the confirmation process. The new standard will help auditors detect fraud and better protect investors now and into the future. Subject to the approval by the SEC, the new standard will take effect for audits of financial statements for fiscal years ending on or after June 15th, 2025. And before the year is complete, we expect to issue a proposal for public comment on follow-on disciplinary proceedings. In total, we have issued 6 proposals, with 1 more expected by the end of the year, and adopted 2 new standards and related amendments since I was sworn in as chair nearly 2 years ago. This year alone, the board has taken more formal actions on standard setting and rulemaking than any year in the last 10 years. Still, we have plenty of work ahead of us. The projects on our agenda address more than half of our standards in one way or another. Nearly all of the standards we are considering are so-called interim standards, which the PCAOB first adopted in 2003, based on standards set by the profession on what was intended to be a temporary basis. Yet, they have not been significantly updated in the last 20 years. As you've heard me say before, our capital markets don't stand still. They evolve constantly. Practices change, technology advances relentlessly, and new risks emerge. To keep investors protected, our standards must keep up. That is why we are committed to getting this agenda done and getting it done right. The public comment period is critical to that process, and we appreciate everyone who shares their feedback. At the same time, our inspections division has been hard at work on goal number 2, enhancing our inspections. Our teams inspect roughly 800 audits in more than 30 jurisdictions around the world each year. Last year, we expanded the PCAOB's reach even further by securing access to inspect completely in China for the first time in history. Our team likes to say the sun never sets on PCAOB inspections because at any given moment, chances are there is an inspection taking place somewhere around the world. In May, we announced enhancements to make our inspection reports more transparent with a new section on auditor independence and a range of other improvements to make more transparent, relevant, and useful information available for investors, researchers, and others. In July, we rolled out new features on our website to help users compare inspection report data. This was just the beginning of our work to increase transparency and make PCAOB data more accessible. I recently read a passage from congressional debates over the Securities Act of 1934, and I think even 90 years later, this philosophy holds true today. There cannot be honest markets without honest publicity. Honest publicity or transparency is one of the most powerful tools the PCAOB has to improve audit quality. Sharing our inspection results empowers audit committees and boards of directors, which are responsible for hiring auditors of public companies, to hold audit firms accountable directly. That is more important than ever, as we are seeing audit quality for both domestic and international firms trend in the wrong direction for the second year in a row. When inspection reports are finalized, PCAOB inspectors expect that approximately 40% of the audits they reviewed in 2022 will have had one or more deficiencies where the audit firm failed to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to support its opinion. That is up 6 percentage points from 2021, which is already 5 points higher than the deficiency rate in 2020. This means audit opinions were signed without completing the audit work required to verify the accuracy of the financial statements. That is a serious problem at any rate, and 40% is completely unacceptable. At the same time, we are also working to empower audit committees with the tools to hold firms accountable on behalf of investors. We've called on audit committees to review our inspection reports and make use of their findings, and to take note of which firms are consistently complying with PCAOB standards and which firms are not, and to apply that knowledge in assessing the auditors of companies where they serve on the board. We've shared specific questions we recommend audit committees ask, including, has our audit engagement been inspected by the PCAOB? Were there any audit areas, that required significant discussions with the PCAOB that did not result in a comment form? Has the engagement partner been inspected on other engagements? If so, what were the results of that inspection? And what is the audit firm doing to address the overall increase in inspection findings? Investors can also use their influence to engage with investor relations and the audit committees of the companies in which they invest, and encourage them to seek out firms with proven track records on quality. The PCAOB will also continue to do our part to drive audit quality forward. As our work to strengthen enforcement shows, the PCAOB will not hesitate to take action against those who put investors at risk. We are making sanctions count. We are expanding how we identify cases, and we are expanding the types of cases we are pursuing. Last year, we imposed the highest penalties in PCAOB history. This year, we've already surpassed that record, and the year is not done. For the second year in a row, our total penalties under this board are higher than the total penalties in each of the 5 years before I was sworn in as chair. Anyone who puts investors at risk should know we mean business. We mean business when it comes to enforcement because we can't afford not to. As Senator Paul Sarbanes said shortly after he helped create the PCAOB 20 years ago, if you don't protect the interests of the investors, it deals a major blow to the workings of the economic system. The U.S. capital markets have established a reputation for integrity because we have a system designed to screen out people who are trying to cut the corners and rig the system. The PCAOB is proud to be part of that system Senator Sarbanes talked about because we know what's at stake. I mentioned the PCAOB inspects in more than 30 jurisdictions globally. That is because companies around the world seek out U.S. capital markets as the gold standard. But the integrity of our capital markets is not inevitable. It takes vigilance to guard against negligence, recklessness, and fraud that threatens our system and the people who depend on it. At the PCAOB, we are working hard to bring that vigilance to our standards, inspections, and enforcement every day. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today, and I look forward to your questions, Professor Davis-Friday.
Thank you so much, Chair Williams. And it's clear that the PCAOB has an ambitious agenda. It's what you set out to do when you took the office. And so now maybe we can start by backing up and hearing a little bit more about your personal journey and what motivates your work.
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that question. My path to get here really starts with my grandmother. My grandmother and grandfather were both farmers in Alabama, and my grandmother literally kept her money under her mattress because she didn't trust the banks, let alone the stock market. So when I became the first person in my family to go to law school, I chose to go into securities enforcement because I understood that in order to help people like my grandmother grow and their community grow wealth, we first had to grow their trust in the capital markets. And I felt like by doing securities enforcement and holding wrongdoers accountable, I could do my part to help bolster the integrity of the financial system and breed confidence. And I really dedicated the majority of my career to investor protection and serving investors. I spent more than 11 years at the SEC, and I also had the honor of serving President Obama in the Office of the White House Counsel, where I worked on financial and economic policy matters. And, you know, I often say that quality audits protect people, and that's really what motivates me, protecting people, their retirement savings, the ability to send their kids to college, anyone who really depends on the soundness of our capital markets to help them build their own version of the American dream. That is what guides everything that we do at the PCAOB, and that is our mission to protect investors.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It resonates with me as well because I became an auditor because I did inventory at my grandmother's pharmacy. There's been a lot of interest in the PCAOB standard setting agenda. We understand you are limited in what you can say about ongoing projects, but is there anything more you can share with us about what next steps we can expect?
Sure, thank you. So our commitment to transparency is very real. And as part of that, as we're modernizing our standards, we put out an agenda of our standard setting projects on the PCAOB's website and an estimate of when we expect to be able to take the next public action on those projects. We recently updated that agenda. We update it multiple times a year as we get more information. And the agenda includes several actions that are planned for 2024. Those include anticipated votes to finalize standards on quality control, non-compliance with laws and regulations, AS 1000, and the amendments to related to aspects on designing performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis of information in electronic form. We also have considerations of several proposals on the rulemaking agenda, including and standard setting agenda, including going concern, firm and engagement performance metrics, attestation, substantive analytical procedures, firm reporting and transparency, and registration. In addition to that, we have a research agenda with some projects on there as well.
Thank you. And I agree completely that the website provides a lot of information and guidance about what is coming. The board's commitment to this ambitious standard setting and rulemaking agenda is clear. Can you share more about why the board is so driven to move this agenda forward?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the simple answer to that question is really our mission, which is to protect investors. As I mentioned in my remarks, when the PCAOB was created a little over 20 years ago, they adopted standards on an interim basis, and they were actually called interim standards. And those are standards that were drafted by the audit profession. And they were supposed to be adopted here for a temporary basis. But now, 20 years later, many of them have not been updated. And we all know that our markets don't stand still. And so it's important for us to keep up. And that is one of the things that we are working to do with this ambitious standard setting agenda.
Thank you. What is the best way for stakeholders to share their views on the board's proposals? And how do you weigh public comment?
So the public comment period is essential to our standard setting and rulemaking agenda and process. And we encourage anyone who's interested in providing their perspectives to do so during a project's open comment period, which is the period that usually follows the board's issuance of a proposal or a concept release. And it includes, those proposals generally include questions for which we're seeking public input. You can provide your comments using whatever format is convenient for you, including email, mailing us a letter electronically, or sending a letter via regular mail. I want everyone to know that we carefully read and consider each and every comment as we work to craft our final rules and standards in a way to best protect investors. And then, in addition to the formal comment process, we have as a board made it a priority to reimagine the PCAOB's approach to stakeholder engagement. And our first major action as a board was to establish 2 advisory groups, the Standards and Emerging Issues Advisory Group and the Investor Advisory Group. And we also have created the very first Office of the Investor Advocate at the PCAOB in order to elevate the voice of investors. And we've also hired a new stakeholder liaison.
Thank you for that. In addition to the standards and rules agendas, the PCAOB also has a research agenda, and you recently added critical audit matters, or CAMs, to that agenda. What can we expect to see from that project?
Yes, so we did recently add CAMs, and the addition of CAMs to our research agenda really demonstrates the board's commitment to hearing from investors and other stakeholders. As I mentioned, the first major action of this board was to reestablish our advisory groups. And we have heard a lot about CAMs, particularly from our investor advisory group. And the addition to the research agenda of that project shows that we are listening and we are committed to learning more. As you know, the post-implementation review period for CAMS is ongoing, and that work is also going to help us inform our research project and any potential next steps we might take.
Understood. This is the 18th auditing conference, and it's about bringing together business, policymakers, public accounting, and academia. And I understand the PCAOB's Office of Economic and Risk Analysis works closely with the academic community. In fact, you recently announced Dr. Martin Schmaltz, Professor of Finance and Economics at the University of Oxford, has joined the PCAOB as Chief Economist. Can you talk a bit about what your Office of Economic and Risk Analysis does and how you work with the academic community?
Thank you for that question. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Schmaltz join the PCAOB. We depend on our Office of Economic and Risk Analysis for evidence-based analysis, and that helps ensure our decision-making is infused with the best data, information, and research. Our Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, which we refer to as OERA, depends on the broader academic community to expand our knowledge and understanding of the economic impact of auditing and audit regulation on our capital markets. OERA plays an important role in all three of our key pillars: standards, inspections, and enforcement. And I'll touch a little bit upon their work in each of those three areas. So getting it right in our standards really requires economic analysis. Our evidence-based approach starts with understanding the current environment, asking what is needed to ensure investors are best protected, and what changes might be necessary to achieve that goal. It also helps us see around the corners and anticipate a standard's impact. So, among other things, we review a standard in terms of its likely economic benefits and costs, competition effects, and potential unintended consequences. After a standard's approved, we often continue to examine its impact through our post-implementation review process, which I mentioned is ongoing right now for CAMS. And we also analyze public and non-public data. In addition, we might conduct surveys and interviews to collect quantitative and qualitative information about the impact of standards on key stakeholders, such as investors, audit committees, and audit firms. And of course, we rely on researchers because reviewing the work of academics outside the PCAOB is really critical to shaping our understanding of the audit and its role in supporting trust in our capital markets. At the same time, we also inspect around 200 audit firms around the world each year. And to stay responsive, our inspectors need data, they need analysis, and they really do need high quality economic research. And so OERA collects data from the information provided to us from third-party data providers, internal sources, and our inspections. And they aggregate that and analyze it to help us identify areas of risk and point our inspectors in the right direction in their inspections. They also develop economic models that can help further guide how we direct our inspections resources. And for example, one of the models that they've developed has a ability to predict the probability of future financial restatements. And of course, staying up to date on the latest research from the broader academic community is also critical to helping us maintain the accuracy of those models over time. And then finally, our enforcement work is also impacted by close work with our risk analysis team. They help to create a list of risk factors that focus on things like significant corporate events, auditor events, or characteristics of issuers. And we use these risk factors and other criteria to help analysts develop a list of audit engagements that our enforcement team can use to find the most likely enforcement matters, ensuring that those who fail to comply with our rules and standards are identified and action is taken to promote audit quality and investor protection. So economic research conducted both within the PCAOB and in the broader academic community is really critical to us achieving our mission and keeping investors protected.
Well, it's reassuring that there's a partnership between the community and the profession and the inspectors. You mentioned audit quality is moving in the wrong direction. And I guess I just want to know, why do you think the deficiencies are increasing? And maybe also, can you tell us the major types of deficiencies contributing to the overall decline in quality?
Sure. So the root causes of this increase in deficiency rates really varies from firm to firm, and there is not one size fits all explanation. Some of the things that we've heard from firms is that the COVID-19 pandemic and the war on talent and the Great Resignation may have been contributing factors, but now, years from the start of the pandemic, these challenges are no longer new, and firms really have a responsibility to meet them head on. The 40% deficiency rate simply cannot be explained away by the pandemic, and many of the deficiencies that the PCAOB inspectors have identified have been recurring for many years and prior to COVID-19. With respect to your question about the types of deficiencies that we're seeing, our staff put out a report. It includes a robust set of examples. Many of these deficiencies are in areas that are inherently complex. They require a significant amount of management judgment, and they also therefore require more attention by the auditor. Some of those areas include revenue and related accounts, business combinations, long-lived assets. And so those are just three, but I do encourage you and the audience to take a look at our staff's report, which includes a more robust list of the examples of the types of deficiencies that we're seeing.
Yes, and I have taken a look at that. I took a look at that report, and the deficiency findings were listed. One specific area included engagement quality reviews. Can you tell us more about the importance of engagement quality reviews and what the PCAOB staff found?
Sure. So as you and many in the audience know, engagement quality reviews are a process that are required under PCAOB rules, where the reviewer, who is not a part of the engagement team, evaluates significant judgments made by the audit engagement team. And the engagement quality reviews occur really before the audit opinion is issued. It really provides investors an important safeguard during the audit process. But unfortunately, audit firms are increasingly failing to perform these functions up to the standard. The staff report that we've been talking about found 42% of firms the PCAOB inspected in 2022 had a quality control criticism related to engagement quality reviews, and that's up from 37% in 2020. The report provides some good practices and reminders for auditors so that they can avoid those deficiencies in the future, and those include things like workload and expertise monitoring, time and increased involvement of EQR reviewers for key audit milestones, increased accountability, new and revised audit tools and guidance, and root cause task forces. It also included some key questions related to EQR that audit committees might want to consider as discussion points when they are engaging with external auditors. And I really encourage auditors and audit committees to take a look at our report and consider its recommendations in their work to help us protect investors and to guard against insufficiently supported audits.
I know that the PCAOB has done some outreach to audit committees. What role can audit committees play in improving audit quality?
I'm glad you asked that question. There really is no substitute for the role of an engaged and informed audit committee when it comes to helping to improve audit quality. They are the gatekeepers on the ground. They vet and hire auditors, and they help oversee their work. So We have made engagement with audit committees a priority at this board. By the end of this year, we would have met with more than 200 audit committees chairs as part of the inspection process. And I mentioned that I have challenged auditors to sharpen their focus. Ultimately, it does fall on the firms to correct the deficiencies that we're seeing in audits, but at the same time, we're also encouraging audit committees to ask tough questions and really hold firms accountable on behalf of investors. We're encouraging them to review our inspection reports, make use of their findings, take note of which firms are consistently complying with PCAOB rules and standards, which ones are not, and apply that knowledge. And I mentioned in my remarks that we published a staff report with specific questions that we recommend that audit committees ask. And, I think they are worth repeating. Has our audit committee, our audit engagement been inspected? Were there any audit areas that required significant discussions with the inspectors that didn't result in a comment form? Has the engagement partner been inspected on other engagements? What were the results of those inspections? And then just in general, what is the audit firm doing to address the overall increase in inspection findings?
Wonderful. In your opening remarks, you mentioned the record-breaking enforcement numbers. Can you share more about the work that goes into achieving those records and why it's so important?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I mentioned that I am an enforcement lawyer by training. I spent 7 years as an enforcement litigator at the SEC. And during that time, I literally spent hours on the phone with investors who had been scammed out of their life savings by crooks. And so in my work, I really do take those stories with me. When I talk about protecting investors, it is those people and people like them that I'm talking about, folks who are saving for retirement, saving to buy a home, saving to put their children through college. It's why we take enforcement so seriously, and it really is because we can't afford not to. So I think it's important that we are removing bad actors from the profession and punishing wrongdoers, because that protects investors and it promotes deterrence. And strengthening our enforcement is one of the key areas that we're focused on in our strategic plan. And we're doing that in a number of ways. You mentioned our penalties. We are making sanctions count. We are expanding how we identify cases. We're expanding the types of cases that we're pursuing. And when it comes to making sanctions count, the numbers speak for themselves. Again, for 2 years in a row, we've imposed the highest penalties in PCAOB history against those who put investors at risk. This year, we imposed the largest fine on an audit firm that's not a member of a global network, and the largest penalty, which was $3 million, against a firm for failures in a single audit. And we also imposed the first ever sanctions involving independence issues in a matter related to a firm's membership in an accounting alliance. And then last year, we issued the largest financial penalty ever imposed on an individual in a settled case. And that was imposing penalties of $150,000 on an audit partner and on his firm. And the average penalties in fiscal year 2022 nearly tripled as compared to the average for the previous 5 years. I do want to emphasize that penalties aren't our only enforcement tool. Under this board, we have required a number of undertakings, including the first ever changes to a firm supervisory structure. We also announced a settlement in which we permanently revoked a firm's registration and barred the owner of that firm, as well as imposing significant penalties for interfering with the board's inspection process. And that was the first settled action in PCAOB history with both a permanent revocation or bar and a significant penalty. And that action really demonstrated our commitment to removing bad actors from the profession and deterring misconduct. So we're expanding our case identification process as well. We're strengthening the process for our inspections team to provide potential referrals of violations that they believe may have happened to our enforcement team for inquiry. We're looking at patterns too, and as part of that, we're conducting more sweeps. Sweeps really do enable us to be able to get additional information from a number of firms at the same time in areas where we suspect that there may be potential violations occurring. And that makes it harder for those who are violating our rules or standards to hide. And we're working with our fellow watchdog agencies in trying to identify potential cases. And then we're also encouraging the public to report potential violations. And everyone can learn more about that on our tips and referrals page on our website, PCAOBUS.org. And finally, I'll just mention that we're expanding the types of cases we're pursuing. We believe that for any violation that is serious enough to put investors at risk, the excuse that it only happened once just doesn't cut it. So we won't hesitate to bring cases that hinge on a single act, wrongful act, whether that act is reckless or negligent. And we aren't just pursuing individual wrongdoing, we're holding firms accountable in more situations for failing to appropriately staff or respond to the risks of an audit. And we are also holding firms accountable for their quality control systems when they aren't up to the standard to keep investors protected. So we are bringing actions when auditors fail to maintain their independence. And we are also making sure that those who break the law know that we won't be constrained by the types of cases that we brought in the past, and we won't be limited to the level of penalties that they've seen before. And we're going to seek admissions in appropriate cases, for example, when there is intentional or egregious conduct. So I am really proud of our enforcement staff. Last year, we brought on a new head of enforcement who you all are going to have a chance to hear from, Bob Rice. And Bob has more than 30 years as a white-collar litigation and investigations expert, including in the private sector, and a long history in public service. And his decades of experience holding wrongdoers accountable is really already proving invaluable to our continued efforts. And under Bob's leadership and our team, we're going to continue to use every tool in our enforcement toolbox.
Congratulations on all of those efforts. When we first spoke, you were looking forward to having access to have inspections in China. And there was a lot of attention paid to the work that you were going to be able to do to gain access to inspect and investigate in China. What is the latest with that effort?
Thanks for that question. So last year, as I mentioned, the PCAOB secured access to inspect completely in China for the first time in history. And in May, we released our inspection reports for a firm located in mainland China and another firm located in Hong Kong, which were both inspected in 2022. In those reports, we inspected a total of 8 engagements for each of the firms, including the types of engagements that the People's Republic of China had previously denied us access to, including state-owned enterprises and issuers in sensitive industries. And both of those reports showed an unacceptable rate of Part 1A deficiencies. We are working to hold firms accountable for fixing those deficiencies, including shining a light through our inspection reports and referring inspection findings to enforcement where appropriate. And if enforcement violations are found, we will not hesitate to order sanctions, including significant penalties and barring bad actors from performing future audits. So the fact that our inspectors found these deficiencies is really a sign that the process is working as it's supposed to, and now we can go about the work of holding those firms accountable. But you asked about going forward. So last year was really just the beginning of our work. Firms in Hong Kong and China are in the process of being inspected this year, and they will be inspected on a regular basis going forward. The two firms we inspected in 2022 audited 40% of the total market share of U.S. listed companies that are audited by Hong Kong and China firms. This year, when we complete our inspections, we're on track to hit 99% of the total market share. And we're just going to continue to demand complete access with no loopholes and no exceptions. If the PRC authorities obstruct us in any way or fail to facilitate our access, the board will act immediately to consider the need to issue a new determination.
Thank you. You mentioned George Baruch, former head of the PCAOB Registration and Inspection Division, was recently sworn in as the PCAOB's newest board member. Can you share your thoughts on his addition to the board and what the change means for the Division of Registration and Inspection?
Sure. So George has been with the PCAOB almost from the very beginning. He has been with us since 2004, and most recently served as our head of our largest division, the Division of Registration and Inspections. For 2 decades, he's committed himself to the PCAOB and the mission of protecting investors. And I couldn't be happier with his appointment to the board. I'm really looking forward to continue to work with him in his new capacity. His knowledge and experience is a tremendous asset to our board as we continue to execute on our strategic plan. And I am really glad that you're going to have an opportunity to hear from him during this conference.
So are we. Thank you. With all that you described, clearly having the right people is an important issue. And one of the issues we hear a lot about is the shortage of young people going into the auditing profession. What solutions do you see to solve the pipeline problem?
Yeah, I mean, this is a critical issue. We have to bring more young people into the field of accounting, and we really have to expand the types of young people who see accounting as a path for them, because without them, we cannot continue to drive audit quality and improve the integrity in our markets and protect investors. From the PCAOB's perspective, we're working to do that through our scholarship program. When Congress created the PCAOB, they had the wisdom to say that all of the penalties that we collect from enforcement has to go to scholarships to students who are studying accounting. And I'm really proud of the fact that this year we have awarded the highest number of scholarships in the PCAOB's history to help young people who are pursuing the field of accounting. More than half of the students who receive their scholarships were women. More than half are students of color, and many are transfers from community colleges. And so that's one thing that the PCAOB is doing. But the reality is that the role that we play in this issue is limited. There's research and reporting that makes it pretty clear that the firms need to pay more to compete for talent, and that students may be going to other types of jobs in the financial industry because of pay. And so this is a critical issue. It is one we're focused on, and we're going to continue to try to do our part through our scholarship program.
Thank you for that. And so we're getting close to the end of our remarks. I want to mention something that we probably can't leave without mentioning, especially when you talk about people, and that's AI. So maybe one of the deterrents we hear is that when students or potential accountants are told that they'll not have a job in the future, AI will take it from them. How is PCAOB thinking about that evolving technology? And maybe you can share with us the relationship between the importance of humans and the technology.
Yes, so thanks for that question. We are really working to try to stay on top of any developments in this area. We have a research project on our research agenda that is specifically designed to study technology. The purpose of that project is to assess whether there is a need for guidance or changes to PCAOB standards or other regulatory actions in light of the increased use of technology-based tools by auditors and preparers, and that includes evaluating the role that technology innovation and AI would play in driving audit quality. We also recently had a breakout session on this topic at our at one of our recent meetings of our Standards and Emerging Issues Advisory Group. And so, while technology evolves, our fundamental mission at the PCAOB stays the same, and that's to protect investors. Anytime auditors are considering the use of new tools, whether it's AI or anything else, I think it's really critical that the firms have strong quality control in place to ensure that they are meeting their responsibilities and requirements under PCAOB rules and standards. But this is an issue that we're going to continue to study.
Are there any tools that you wish you had at the PCAOB that you don't right now?
Well, that's a great question. So if I were to choose one, the PCAOB is precluded by law from sharing any information about our ongoing enforcement proceedings, including whether or not those proceedings have been initiated. And if Congress were to choose to change that and allow us to make those proceedings public, some other regulators are permitted to do, that is something I would support.
Well, I'm going to take the last question to recognize the fact that we do have students in the audience here. And I'm wondering, would you like to just share a few final words for them?
Sure. I'm delighted that there are students participating in this conference, and I want to thank you for choosing a career in accounting. You are going to be critical as we work to continue to improve audit quality and uphold the integrity of our markets and protect investors for decades to come. And one thing I'd like for you to do as you think about your studies and where they might take you is to consider public service. Every day in your classes, I'm sure you're hit with a lot of jargon and numbers and acronyms, and that's important. But when we cut through it, this work that you're studying, accounting, it's really about people. And people is at the heart of everything that we do at the PCAOB. And so when I talk about protecting investors, and you've heard me say this during my remarks today, I'm talking about workers who are saving for retirement and parents who are saving to put their kids through college. And I'm really talking about your communities, your families, anyone who depends on the capital market to save and invest for the American dream. And so when you are thinking about your work, know that all of this and all of these people really depend on quality, accurate audits to make their decisions financially that are going to help make an impact on their family and their futures. So I would encourage you not to let anyone tell you that accounting is boring, because it's all about people.
Williams, thank you so much. Those are extremely important words and a message for our students to hear. Thank you again for your participation. We look forward to seeing you every time that you come, and good luck with all that you have on your agenda this year.
Thank you, Professor Davis Friday, and I wish you all the best with this fantastic conference, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.